Hi, everyone. Okay, so I just started this lecture and got a bit of the way through it, and then my Apple Pencil fell apart. So I'm hoping that I fixed it and that I won't have any more issues with it. And let's just think of that as being a dress rehearsal for what I'm about to do. So what I want to do now is to start to take a look at these truth functional connectives that we talked about the last time. Remember that we have 5 truth functional connectives. We have the ampersand, the wedge, the tilde, the horseshoe, and the triple bar. We also have, remember, a stock of atomic sentence letters. So we're going to be using these when we're translating from English into SL and from SL into English, which is a very nice way of learning a language, is by doing translations back and forth, whether it's a formal language such as this or a natural language. We will use these capital letters to translate simple sentences rather than atomic sentences rather than molecular ones. And we also have, which we're not going to be talking about in this lecture, we have some punctuation. We have the left and right parentheses. So what I want to do is one by one take a look at these 5 truth functional connectives, define them, think about them in relation to the sort of approximations of their English translations, and start to do some translations, simple translations. So let's take a look at a simple example using the sentences that we used in the last lecture. Chester loves to swim, and Charlotte enjoys, let's just shorten it to logic. Okay? So that and, we've got sort of an atomic sentence, a simple sentence here, and a simple sentence here. We can use, say, C to stand for Chester loves to swim, and L for Charlotte enjoys logic, and then we can join them using the ampersand. So this is a pretty good translation into SL of the English sentence, which is called a conjunction. So what I want to talk about now is the conjunction. And remember that the parts, the components of a conjunction are called conjuncts. And you conjoin, lots of vocabulary, you conjoin the conjuncts to form a conjunction. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define ampersand. And I'm going to do this, and along the way we're also going to see that it is a truth functional connective in the sense that I explained in the last lecture. That is that the truth value of a sentence used by means of it to form a compound sentence, the truth value of a conjunction is going to be a function of the truth value of the components. So, and I'm going to define the conjunction by means of what's called a characteristic truth table. So we're going to display in tabular form how the conjunction fares under different possible situations, so to speak. Okay, what is a characteristic truth table? A characteristic truth table is just going to be a table where we're displaying how the conjunction fares. And I'm going to use these capital letters P and Q that I'm using here are not sentence letters of SL. They are what are called meta variables. And I'm drawing them in that funny way because in the book they are in bold font. They're meta variables. And a meta variable ranges over sentences of SL. They range over sentences of SL. But they are not actually sentences of SL. They're not sentence letters in the way that A, B, C, D, and so on are sentence letters. Oh, I just got a visit from a kitty cat here. Okay, they are not sentence letters. Okay, this might feel a little confusing. Meta variables ranging over sentences. It's very much like the notion of variable that you encountered in algebra. So if you think about a variable in algebra, say x, y, z, these ranged over numbers, right? But they're not numbers themselves. Just as meta variables range over sentences of SL, but they're not actually sentences themselves. They're not sentence letters and not sentences. So X, Y, and Z and so on range over numbers, but they're not numbers themselves. So for instance, if we say X plus 2 equals 6, this is just saying, well, there's some number that when you add 2 to it, the result is going to be 6. So this is a variable. It ranges over numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, but it's not a number itself. And so these bold-faced P's and Q's are kind of like that. They range over sentences, but they're not sentences. So this little table that I'm about to draw that defines the truth functional conjunction is going to show us, or display for us, the definition of the conjunction. So when I write down bold-faced P, and that's a really messy looking, when I write down bold-faced P and bold-faced Q, what I'm saying is that, give me any sentence at all of SL, P, and give me another sentence Q, and now I'm going to think about the conjunction of those two sentences. Okay, so, and this will, I promise all of this will make, a whole lot more sense, if it doesn't already, as we continue to work through this material. So let's think about our original sentence about good old Chester and Charlotte, okay? So one possibility is that Chester really does love to swim and Charlotte does enjoy logic, and I assert the conjunction of those two. Chester loves to swim and Charlotte enjoys logic. In other words, I'm considering the case where both of the conjuncts are true. Well, it's pretty clear, I think, that the conjunction is true in that situation. And so I hope you're starting to see, okay, I can figure out what the truth value of the compound is, of this conjunction is, merely by knowing the truth values of the components. Okay. Another possibility is, well, Chester does love to swim, but Charlotte does not enjoy logic. And if I assert their conjunction, if I say, hey, Chester loves to swim and Charlotte enjoys logic, and one's true and one's false, I've said something false. Another similar possibility is that Chester does not love to swim and Charlotte does enjoy logic. In other words, we're considering two sentences, one of which is false and one is true. If you assert their conjunction, I think it's pretty clear that the conjunction is false. And then finally, we've got the case where both of the conjuncts are false. So, suppose Chester doesn't love to swim and Charlotte doesn't enjoy logic, and I assert their conjunction, well, it's pretty clear that I've said something false. Okay? So this characteristic truth table basically defines the ampersand. Whoops, what happened there? And it tells us how that sentence fares under these four cases here, sort of are exhaustive of the possibilities, right? The sentences could both be true, one false, one true, or they could both be false. And it was not at all difficult to motivate this characteristic truth table, this definition for ampersand, because the meaning of the ampersand really does very closely match the way that we use the word and in English. Okay, that said, there are cases of English sentences that have the word and in them, but they're not properly translated as a truth functional conjunction into SL. And then conversely, there are also going to be cases where a sentence should be translated or is appropriately translated as a truth functional conjunction, but it doesn't have the word and in it. So I want to take a look at some examples of of those. Let me just say that the book talks about paraphrasing. So the book, when they're doing translation exercises, they have kind of an intermediate step between English and the translation into SL that they call the truth functional paraphrase. It's kind of a logical analysis of the sentence, which is a good thing to do. And there are going to be times where we're absolutely going to have to do some paraphrasing of the English as an intermediate step before we get into the full translation into SL. However, I don't find the way that the book paraphrases to be particularly helpful, and sometimes it's really cumbersome. So there's no need for you to paraphrase in that way if you don't find it helpful. So you don't have to paraphrase a la the text if you don't find it to be a helpful step in your translation process. Okay? That said, I mean, there are going to be times where with a complicated sentence, where we're absolutely going to have to do some paraphrasing, but we'll paraphrase in a way that makes sense for us. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at some examples of cases that may look like they're conjunctions, but they're not, or that don't look like they're conjunctions, but they are. So let's see. Charlotte, you're going to see that there's certain names that I use over and over in examples. Charlotte is a chubby calico. Whoops, cat that is. Okay, so we want to translate that into SL. So how are we going to do that? Well, first we need to think about what's going on in the sentence. Charlotte is a chubby calico. It looks as if what we're doing is we're asserting that Charlotte is both chubby and a calico. So here, this, I think, is a case where there's no and in the sentence, but the sentence is properly translated as a truth functional conjunction. And so why don't we let, I've got all these C's in here, why don't we let H, I'm going to do a little dictionary here. And this is involving a little bit of paraphrasing. H stand for Charlotte is chubby. And let's let A stand for Charlotte is a calico. And now this seems to me to be a good translation of the sentence. H and A. Charlotte is chubby and Charlotte is a calico. I think that captures what's going on in this sentence. So it's properly translated as a truth functional conjunction, even though it doesn't have the word and. The English sentence doesn't have the word and in it. The powder, I'm just going to do some more examples. Some simple ones for you. The powder contains sulfur and magnesium. Okay, so we do have to do a little bit of paraphrasing before we do the full translation. We may have to, it's not difficult, but we're going to need two separate sentences that we're conjoining, right? So we're going to need, so S stands for the powder contains sulfur, and M stands for the powder contains magnesium. Okay? And so the full translation then would be S and M. I think that's a good translation of the original English sentence. But see how we had to kind of think about what was going on in the sentence and pull out these two atomic sentences from the original English sentence. Okay, let's move on. How about neither my brother nor I speaks Icelandic. Okay, so this sentence does not have the word and in it. But if you think about it, I think you'll see that it is actually properly translated as a conjunction of I don't speak Icelandic and my brother doesn't speak Icelandic. So if we have I stand for I do not speak Icelandic. It's a very difficult language. And B stand for my brother does not speak Icelandic. Then the whole thing becomes I and B. So even though, again, even though the English sentence doesn't contain the word and, I think it's properly translated as a truth functional conjunction. Here's another one. Your homework is on the kitchen floor. Which hasn't been mopped in weeks. Okay, so what's going on with this relative clause? What role is that playing? Your homework is on the kitchen floor, which hasn't been mopped in weeks. It seems to me that this relative clause is really just a conjunct, right? So it's going to be, I'm not going to write out, I'm going to call these, when I do something like this, I'm calling it a dictionary where I'm indicating the meanings of the atomic sentence letters. But if we just let H stand for your homework is on the kitchen floor, and M stand for the kitchen floor has not been mopped in weeks. Well, maybe I will write it out because I want you to understand that you actually are doing. It's necessary to do some paraphrasing when you do these translations. I'm just saying that it's not necessary for you to paraphrase exactly the way that the book does it because I find that it's a little bit cumbersome. So let's just do this. H is your homework is on the kitchen floor. That we didn't have to paraphrase at all. And then M is the kitchen floor has not been mopped in weeks. I have to kind of spell that out. And when you do translations, it's very important that you write out your dictionaries, that you make it very clear what your sentence letters are standing for, because it may not be obvious to us. So it's very important that you do that. Okay, and so now it just becomes H and M, where H means this and M means that. Okay? And so again, here's an example of a sentence that does not have the word and in it, but is properly translated as a truth functional conjunction. Okay. So now I want to take a look at some examples of sentences that have the word and in it, but are not actually conjunctions. So let's see. Lima and San Jose are over 1,000 miles apart. Oops, I didn't mean to put, you know what, I'm so used, that was misleading, totally misleading. Lima and San Jose, because that ampersand is a technical piece of our vocabulary. Lima and San Jose are over 1,000 miles apart. Well, this is not a conjunction. It's not like Lima is 1,000 miles apart and San Jose is 1,000 miles apart. It's not a truth functional conjunction. You could actually, if you wanted to translate this into SL, you just have to translate it as an atomic sentence. You can't get inside the sentence, even though it has the word and. It's not a conjunction. 20 students in the class were selected and given free ice cream. Okay, well this has the word and in it, but is it 20 students in the class were selected and 20 students were given ice cream? That doesn't capture it, right? Because this could be true. Like suppose you have, all these people in the classroom and these 20 were selected. This, if you translate it in this way, these guys could get the free ice cream, right? So this sentence in English pretty clearly says that the same students who were selected are the ones who got the free ice cream. And you can't do that with the truth functional conjunction. So this is not a good translation of the sentence because, as I said, this could be true. 20 students could be selected and 20 students could be given ice cream, but they might be different students. Okay, so there's another kind of interesting example of an and sentence that is not a truth functional conjunction. How about, this is kind of interesting. Chester is a famous pianist. That, if you take a look at it, grammatically, it's very much like Charlotte is a chubby calico, right? Charlotte is chubby and Charlotte is a calico. But should this be Chester is famous and Chester is a pianist? That doesn't capture it either, because what we're saying here in the English sentence is that he's famous for his piano playing. Whereas this could be true if he's famous for, playing the trumpet. And by the way, he's a pianist, but he's not famous for it. So this is not a good translation of that, which is kind of interesting because this has exactly the same grammatical structure as Charlotte is a chubby calico. So you really have to think about what's going on in the sentence, what the intent of the sentence is, what the meaning of the sentence is, and not translate these in a sort of reflexive way. Oh, there's an and, it must be a conjunction, and so on. Okay. How about this one? The professor gave him a C, and he went home and wept. Okay, so there's an and here, but should it be translated as the professor gave him a C and the student went home and wept? Well, no, because this could be true. It could be true if suppose both of these are true, right? He could be that the professor did give him a C, and it could be true that he went home and he wept, but he wept because, I don't know, he totaled his car, and that's why he wept. But the sentence, the English sentence, pretty clearly there's a causal connection here, that the professor gave him a C, and he went home and wept, and that's why he went home and wept. And you can't capture this causality with the ampersand. That is not a good translation of the sentence. You can't capture causality. The ampersand is just a truth functional connective. And going back, let's look once again at the truth function, at the characteristic truth table for the sentence. Let me neaten it up a little bit. We see that the conjunction is true. The only way in which a conjunction is true is when both conjuncts are true, and otherwise it's false. And that's all there is to it. So we can't capture this causal connection that I think is intended by this sentence, that the reason that he went home and wept is because the professor gave him a C. And sort of similarly, If you say something like, the team won and the crowd went crazy. That's not going to be the team won and the crowd went crazy, because it could be true that the team won, and it could be true that the crowd went crazy, but the crowd might have gone crazy because, I don't know, like a bunch of kittens ended up walking across the field, and that's why they went crazy. But not because the team won. Whereas the English sentence pretty clearly is indicating that they went crazy because the team won. So again, that's not a good translation of and. Okay, so I think the conjunction is pretty straightforward. We had no trouble motivating this characteristic truth table for the ampersand. It's very closely connected with the word and in English. Okay, let's move on to disjunction. And let's switch to, what color should we use? That's a weird color. Let's try that brown. We want to talk about the disjunction, which is very closely related to or. That is the symbol that we're going to be using for the disjunction. The parts of the disjunction are called disjuncts. The verb is disjoin. We disjoin the disjuncts to form the disjunction. But the parts are called disjuncts. And it's closely related to the word or in English. Okay. So here's an example that I've had some success with, not as much success as I think I should have had with it. I still think it's a good example, so I'm going to use it again. And it reinforces one of the themes that we've been using in our examples. Okay, so here's the situation. You got somebody who has planted her garden, and in her garden, she's planted several rows of corn, okay? And she's cultivated, she's watered and she's weeded around the corn, and she's watched the corn grow, and the corn gets higher and higher and higher, and she's waiting for, the ears develop, and she's waiting for the ears of corn to be just right before she harvests them and cooks them for her friends for dinner, because there's probably just enough corn to, feed a bunch of people once, because it's a small garden. Okay, so she's looking at the corn and she's thinking, okay, tomorrow's the day, and she invites some people over to have dinner the next night. She's going to harvest the corn, and they're all going to enjoy it. She goes out the next day. The corn is gone. It's just been devastated by something or other, some creature or other, okay? And, she has an idea that groundhogs like corn, and she also has an idea that squirrels do, because she's been seeing that the squirrels have been paying a fair amount of attention to the corn. So she says, the corn, once she recovers, and regains her equilibrium, she says the corn was eaten by groundhogs or squirrels. Okay? So what are the components of that? That's an or sentence. The components are the corn was eaten by groundhogs. And the corn was eaten by squirrels. Okay? So, if she asserts the corn was eaten by groundhogs or squirrels, I think we have to agree that at least one of these two sentences has got to be true, even though we may not know which one, right? So if this is true, then at least one of these has got to be true. We may not know which one is true. Nor do I preclude the possibility that they're both true. But I am denying, or sorry, she's denying that they're both false when she says the corn was eaten by groundhogs or squirrels. So this is a disjunction. And let's see whether we can come up with the characteristic truth table for the disjunction with this example in mind, okay? So remember, the characteristic truth table, we're using these meta variables as a way to define the truth functional connective wedge here. Okay, and again, there are going to be 4 possible situations for us to consider. Both of them ate them. The groundhogs ate them and the squirrels didn't. The groundhogs didn't, but the squirrels did. And neither groundhogs nor squirrels did. Okay? So we're looking at the truth conditions of this sentence. The corn was eaten by groundhogs or squirrels. Okay? Now, let's work from the bottom up. Suppose that, let's enrich the story a little bit. Suppose that, she had set up one of these remote cameras, like a nanny cam, by the vegetable garden. And when the corn was devastated, she goes back and she looks at the footage, right? And she sees, we're thinking about this 4th case now, where she sees, oh, it wasn't an animal at all. It was those kids who lived next door. They went and ravaged my corn. So if she asserted that the corn was eaten by the groundhogs or the squirrels, but no, neither one of them, right, they're both disjuncts are false, right? These are the disjuncts that we're considering. Both disjuncts are false. Well, it's clearly false, right? And now suppose that she looks at the footage and she sees, oh, you know what? There were no groundhogs at all. There were just squirrels there. So that's this case where it's false that the groundhogs ate it, but true that the squirrels did, and she said something true, right? So one of the disjuncts is true. The other one's false, but it's true. And now, once again, suppose she discovers that, oh, wait a minute, there were no squirrels, in this case. There are no squirrels eating them. It's just those groundhogs. That's true, too. Okay, so no difficulty with those 3 cases. And now suppose that she looks at the footage that she's got and she sees that the groundhogs and the squirrels, they just had a big party, and the groundhogs and the squirrels are all eating the corn together. They had a groundhog squirrel corn party. That is this case where both the groundhogs and the squirrels ate the corn. And she asserts the groundhog was eaten by squirrels or groundhogs. I would like to put true there. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, not so sure. I'm thinking that or means one or the other or not both. I picked this particular example because I thought that it motivated this definition of or. But my experience has been not so easy. There's still people who think that this is the right truth table for the or. And that's interesting and instructive. Even though I still think this is a good example for the one I've got in brown here. Let me go back to my brown. For this one. The reason that it's instructive is that in English, I believe that the word or has 2 meanings. There are 2 senses of the word or. There's what's called the inclusive or and the exclusive or. Now, those of you who think that what I've got circled in blue is the right table, that is that what we should put as false when both disjuncts are false, or when both disjuncts are true, you want to say it's false. You think you're using the exclusive sense of or. And a nice example of or being used exclusively would be something like you go to a restaurant and the waitress says to you, for dessert, you may have brownies or blackberry pie. Well, it's pretty clear that you can't have both. So if you say, oh, I'd like the brownies and the blackberry pie, she's going to say, no, I'm using the word or exclusively, and you must know that. You can have one or the other, but you can't have both. Okay? And so there are lots of cases in English where we do clearly use or exclusively, and that would involve putting a false in this top row where both disjuncts are true. However, there is another meaning, another sense of the word or in English, and that is the inclusive sense of or. And I thought that the example that I gave was a pretty good example of or being used inclusively, where I thought that most people would say, oh yeah, well if the groundhogs and the squirrels both ate the corn, then it's still true that the corn was eaten by groundhogs or squirrels. But some people just don't see that. But there are cases in English where clearly or is being used inclusively. If this example about the groundhogs and squirrels didn't do it for you. Here's an example. So, and this is the case. In the Harvard Philosophy Handbook, so for people who are majoring in philosophy at Harvard, there's this handbook of basically, this is what you have to make, this is what you need to do in order to major, these are the requirements, here's how you fulfill the requirements, and so on. It says, a student satisfies the logic requirement, and by the way, every philosophy department, at least in this country, pretty much every, I don't know of an exception to it, requires a logic course for the philosophy major. So at Harvard it says, a student satisfies the logic requirement on the condition that the student takes Philosophy 140, which is Harvard's equivalent to Philosophy 33. The student takes Philosophy 140, that is the logic course, or the student passes the departmental exam. So you might have a student who says, oh, I took logic, I don't know, over the summer, or I took a math course that was basically logic or something, and so I don't think I need to take Philosophy 44. So Philosophy 140. So they say, okay, well, you can satisfy the logic requirement by passing the departmental, exam. Okay, so this is what's required for satisfying the logic requirement. So suppose you have a student at Harvard, and there's some really eager beaver students at Harvard who both takes the course and passes the departmental exam, just isn't satisfied with one or another, decides to do both. Takes that exam, passes it, and then takes and passes Philosophy 140. Well, there's no way that anybody would say, uh-oh, you did not satisfy the logic requirement because you took Philosophy 140 and you passed the departmental exam. I mean, that's clearly a case where, so you have the logic course or the exam, and if they're both true, you do think the whole sentence is true. Nobody's going to want to say that's false. Another example would be something like, when you see prerequisites, when you register for courses, you might say prerequisite for, Bio 13 or bio or genetics or something. Okay, prerequisite for some upper level biology course could be Bio 13 or junior standing. Well, no one's going to say that you haven't satisfied the prerequisite if you are a junior who has also taken Bio 13. So, there are lots of cases where or is used inclusively. And then there are also cases where or is used exclusively. The wedge, however, is the inclusive or. So the characteristic truth table, I didn't have to erase all of that. The characteristic truth table for the wedge is this. It's true, oh, no it's not. What am I talking about? The characteristic truth table, it's getting late in the day for me. The characteristic truth table for the wedge is this. It's false only when both disjuncts are false, otherwise it's true. So it's kind of an and or, right? It's the inclusive sense of or. That's what our wedge means. We will have the ability to express the exclusive or, the one where you have false here, that one. We will have the ability to express that in our language, but not by using the wedge. Okay, so that's what the wedge means. It's the inclusive or. Okay, so I didn't time that. I don't know. Let me just do. Is that enough for this? Maybe that's enough for this lecture. I wish I had looked at my watch. Let's do negation. Why not? Negation's a lot simpler. Negation. Tilde. This is something that you stick in front of a sentence. You prefix a sentence with it. It's a one-place connective, whereas the other ones are two-place connectives. Let's see. How about, or in English, it might be something like, it is not the case that, or you might embed not in a sentence, such as, you know, I am not Icelandic, which I take to be equivalent to, it is not the case that. This is one of these constructions. It is not the case that you hear philosophers use a lot. Not the case that I am Icelandic. And if you don't watch out, you'll find yourself using it too in a little while. And both of these are basically the negations of the simpler sentence, I am Icelandic. It's not the case that I am Icelandic. And if we have I stand for I am Icelandic, then the full translation is that. Okay. Negation is pretty straightforward. The characteristic truth table for negation, it's only a one-place connective, so you have one sentence, and you want to know the conditions on which the negation of P, where P is a meta variable that ranges over sentences of SL, under what conditions is not P true or false. And so here's our little characteristic truth table. There are only two possibilities, right? P could be true or P could be false. When P is true, the negation of P is false. So if it's true that I am Icelandic, then it's false that I'm not Icelandic. If it's false that I am Icelandic, then it's true that I am not Icelandic. So it just flips the truth value of the sentence. And translations using not are really pretty straightforward. I mean, there are cases that might require a little bit of thought, a little bit of paraphrasing. So for instance, if I said something like, my son didn't say anything at breakfast this morning. That sounds like it's a negation. What is it a negation of? It's a negation of my son said something. Right? It's not the case that my son said something, and if we, we use the atomic sentence letter, say S, to stand for that, then the whole thing becomes not S. So these are, there are cases where you have to think about it. Let me just look at one more. It isn't as if he needs to stay out past midnight. Well, that would be the negation of he does need to stay out past midnight. So it would be the negation of that. So if N stands for he needs to stay out past midnight, then the whole translation becomes that. So it's not, it's fairly simple, and the characteristic truth table for the negation seems quite straightforward. You're really just flipping the truth value, and it's also straightforward, I think, that it's a truth functional connective. Okay, I'm going to stop here now. There are two more connectives that we need to look at. One is this one, and one is that one, the conditional and the biconditional. I just remembered as I drew the triple bar, a couple of years ago, I sort of, when I was teaching in a classroom, remember those days, and I was introducing the triple bar for the biconditional, and a student in the class raised his hand and said that his brother had taken my logic course like the year before or something, and he was so taken with this symbol, the triple bar, and maybe the meaning of it, I'm not sure, that he had it tattooed on his wrist. So anyway, thought I'd share that with you. I thought that was kind of interesting. So there's somebody out there who's taken logic who has, and you might run into him sometime, and he has the triple bar tattooed on his wrist just because he liked the symbol. I will leave you with that thought, and I'll stop for now.